Early this morning near Kursk, Ukrainian teams reached a downed Russian Su-35 first, racing jamming and drone threats to move its radar out fast.
January 3rd, 5:20 a.m. local time. A muddy field in the Kursk gray zone, somewhere between tree lines and broken fence posts. In the dark, a Russian Su-35 sits at a dead angle, belly down, half buried like it fell out of the sky and never got to finish the crash. It isn't a clean wreck. The canopy is intact, the fuselage is mostly whole, and the airframe still looks recoverable, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. Because in this war, a recoverable fighter does not stay abandoned for long. Ukrainian operators reach it first, not because they are closer, but because they decide faster. They are not here to film a trophy shot or strip souvenirs in the mud. They are here for the one component that can reshape tomorrow's air picture: the Urbis E radar buried inside the nose. That radar is the prize because it carries tactics, scanning behavior, and threat libraries that don't show up on any battlefield map. You can replace panels, rebuild a tail, even swap parts across airframes. But you can't easily replace what a modern fighter knows about the sky. The problem is time. A downed Su-35 is like a flare in the darkness, and every Russian unit within range will be racing the same clock. Ukraine has a narrow window before recovery teams, drones, and strike assets turn this field into a kill zone. They do not try to start the jet. They do not gamble on a miracle taxi out through ruts and frozen ditches. They go straight to extraction logic. Protect the nose section, reduce the profile, and move fast enough that Russian eyes arrive too late. That is where the mission turns ugly. A fighter with wide wings cannot be dragged through soft ground and narrow tracks like a pickup truck. If they haul it whole, the convoy slows, and slow convoys become burning convoys. So the solution is brutal and practical. Charges are placed along the wing routes, not as a headline-making stunt, but as a transport decision. The cut is controlled, designed to break the jet down without crushing the fuselage or mangling the nose where the radar lives. Minutes later, the wings are severed. The airframe becomes smaller, lighter, and suddenly movable. Less fighter jet, more oversized cargo. A heavy transporter backs in, winches scream under load, and steel cable tightens as the wingless fuselage begins to slide, inch by inch, out of the mud's grip. The field fights back. Tires slip, the trailer shudders, and every meter forward feels like a minute stolen from the clock. But the fuselage finally climbs onto the bed, and the convoy stops planning an escape and starts executing one. And as the transporter noses toward the corridor back to the border, the sky above the tree line stops feeling empty. Somewhere out there, Russian systems are waking up, links are locking in, and the first search patterns are already sliding into place. If you want to stay locked on to what that Su-35 radar reveals next, hit subscribe because this is the kind of recovery mission that doesn't stay quiet for long. January 3rd, 5:34 a.m. The transporter does not drive like it is carrying metal. It drives like it is carrying a secret with a fuse on it. Every bump risks shifting the fuselage. Every stop risks turning a narrow escape into a stationary target. Ukraine's team treats the first kilometers as the most lethal part because this is when Russia is still uncertain. If the Russians confirm the jet is being moved, especially the nose section, this stops being battlefield cleanup and becomes a focused hunt. That is why the convoy does not move alone. Not in a cinematic parade-like escort, but in layers that look boring on purpose. A lead vehicle runs far ahead to read the road, not just for mines, but for fresh tracks and new drone shadows overhead. The corridor is terrain, not distance. The route hugs tree lines, low folds in farmland, and any strip of ground that breaks line of sight from the sky. In open fields, a wingless Su-35 still looks like a bright geometric shape under morning thermal. And the radio discipline is strict. The team does not talk in long calls. They use short checks and pre-brief timing because long transmissions are how you get mapped. Every unnecessary second on the air is a breadcrumb. 15:41 a.m. The first sign of Russian response is not an explosion, it is interference. The drone feed that was smooth minutes ago begins to stutter, then pixelate, then recover, like the air itself is being squeezed. Nobody says jamming out loud. because everybody already knows what it means. When the air becomes noisy, you have two choices: slow down to regain control, or keep moving and accept that your awareness will be imperfect. Ukraine chooses motion because the only thing worse than a blind convoy is a blind convoy that's not moving. So they build redundancy into the plan. One drone stays high and wide to watch the bigger pattern roads, intersections, any sudden movement that doesn't belong. Another stays lower, closer, just to keep eyes on the transporter's immediate bubble, where a single ambush vehicle can end the story. 5:49 a.m., a second convoy appears on a parallel track, deliberately sloppy and visible, kicking up more dust than it needs to. It is not carrying the jet, it is carrying attention. In this war, decoys are not props, they are pressure valves. Because Russia's goal is simple. They do not need to destroy a transporter to win. They only need to prevent the radar from crossing the line. If they can force Ukraine to abandon the fuselage or damage the nose section, the intelligence value collapses. That is why the convoy avoids predictable bridges and obvious choke points. It chooses routes that feel wrong to a normal driver, longer, rougher, less efficient, because efficiency is how you get intercepted. The whole logic is to make the Russians waste time guessing. 5:57 a.m. The tension peaks at a small crossroads where the tree cover thins for just long enough to make everyone feel exposed. The lead vehicle clears it, then the transporter rolls in, heavy and slow, with the fuselage riding low like a dark animal on steel. No one fires. No one cheers. They just listen to the air. When a drone is overhead, you can sometimes hear it before you see it, a faint mechanical whine that makes your shoulders lock up without permission. And then the spotter drone catches movement near the horizon, small, fast, cutting across the corridor like it knows where to look. The feed zooms in, the image jitters through the interference, and the operator realizes the worst part of the mission isn't the road anymore. It's the moment Russia stops searching randomly and starts searching correctly. January 3rd, 6 a.m. The sky brightens just enough to make shapes readable, and that is exactly the problem. Night hides mistakes, but dawn exposes movement, and a convoy dragging an aircraft fuselage cannot pretend to be anything else. The interference thickens again, not as a constant wall, but in pulses, like someone is sweeping a flashlight through the spectrum. The wide drone holds picture for 2 seconds, then drops into blocky frames, then snaps back, and every flicker feels like a hand reaching for the convoy's throat. The transporter keeps rolling because stopping would give the Russians a fixed point to work with, and fixed points are easier to kill than moving ones. The driver follows the lead vehicle's tires like they are rails, because there is no room for improvisation when the cargo is wider than the lane. 6 to 11 a.m. The first real warning comes from the high drone, not the close escort. It catches a small group of vehicles shifting position on a distant service road, not charging in, but angling, as if they are trying to match the convoy's direction without committing. That is how the trap starts in real life. It does not begin with gunfire. It begins with geometry. The convoy commander calls a reroute with a single short instruction, and the transporter turns onto a narrower cut that runs between low trees and wet ground. The path is ugly, slow, and risky, but it breaks sight lines, and for a few minutes, that is the only currency that matters. 6:15 a.m. The close drone suddenly sees it, a thin, fast-moving speck skimming low, coming in from the left. It is not a missile, not a jet, and not a clean silhouette, but it moves with intent, and it moves like it is guided. A Russian FPV drops into view, small enough to be missed by the naked eye, but on the feed it is unmistakable, a racing dot that is hunting for the transporter's shadow. The operator shouts the angle, the convoy doesn't panic, and the driver does the only thing that makes sense. He pushes into the trees. The transporter swings tighter than it should, tires biting into soft ground, and the fuselage leans in a way that makes everyone flinch. Nobody says it, but they all feel the same thought. If the load shifts here, the whole operation ends without an enemy ever landing a hit. 6:17 a.m. The FPV dives, loses the line for a split second behind branches, then reappears lower, closer, faster. The drone is not trying to destroy the transporter with brute force. It is trying to force a stop, a crash, a pin in the road that turns a moving target into a stranded one. The escort team opens fire with controlled bursts. Not spraying, not heroic, just disciplined panic. The FPV twitches, climbs, and disappears behind the tree line, and nobody celebrates because the silence after a miss is often the space before the second attempt. Then the interference spikes so hard the close drone freezes mid-frame, locking the convoy into a blind bubble. For a few seconds, the only eyes left are human eyes, and human eyes are the worst sensors in a war that punishes delay. 6:20 a.m., the decoy convoy finally pays for its job. On the wide feed, a fast-moving drone swarm shifts toward the wrong target, drawn by the louder signature and the more obvious dust trail. The decoy is doing what it was built to do, pulling the search away, but it also confirms the nightmare. Russia is not guessing anymore. Russia is actively hunting. The convoy commander makes a decision that feels reckless until you understand the clock. He orders a short sprint through an exposed stretch, a flat corridor where trees thin and the road opens. It is dangerous, but it is also faster, and speed is sometimes the only counter to a tightening net. The transporter surges forward, engine straining, and the fuselage rides low like a wounded animal. The escort vehicles widen their spacing to reduce the chance that one strike cripples the entire package, and the team's focus collapses into one single objective. Get across the next line. Get into cover again. Do not stop. 6:24 a.m. The high drone's feed clears for half a heartbeat, and in that clean instant, it catches a new shape near the horizon, another low mover cutting in, cleaner than the last. The operator zooms, the image shudders, and the convoy commander hears a phrase he never wanted on this mission. Second inbound. The transporter is still in the open. The convoy is still mid-sprint. The jamming is still choking the sky. And somewhere behind them, the Russians have finally aligned the angle that matters most, an angle where one hit doesn't just destroy a vehicle, it erases the proof that Ukraine ever touched the Su-35 at all. January 3rd, 6:26 a.m. The second inbound doesn't announce itself with noise. It announces itself with a change in the convoy's breathing. Everyone's suddenly talking less, everyone's suddenly moving faster, like silence can make a target smaller. The transporter is still exposed, still heavy, still committed to a road that has nowhere to hide. The lead vehicle throws a warning with a hand signal through the windshield, because radios are unreliable now, and even a clean transmission feels like lighting a match in tall grass. On the high feed, the inbound drops lower and disappears behind the horizon line, using the terrain like a curtain. It isn't charging straight in. It's shaping the approach, trying to arrive at the only angle that matters, the one where the transporter can't turn without tipping the load. The convoy commander does not gamble on bravery, he gambles on geometry. He orders a hard right into a drainage cut that runs alongside the road, ugly enough to break line of sight, wide enough to keep the transporter upright. The driver follows without hesitation, and the tires slap into mud with a sound that feels louder than it should. 6:28 a.m. The jamming surges again, worse than before, like someone turned a dial from nuisance to suffocation. The close drone's picture breaks into frozen frames, then returns in a stuttering rhythm that makes distance hard to judge and speed almost impossible to trust. That is when the convoy becomes vulnerable in the most dangerous way. Not to a direct strike, but to confusion. In a fog of interference, you don't need to be outgunned to lose, you just need to misread one turn. The transporter crawls forward through the cut, slower now, and the escort vehicles spread wide to keep a clear lane. Nobody wants to bunch up. Nobody wants to become a single clustered signature that an incoming drone can pick apart in one pass. 6:31 a.m. The inbound reappears, briefly, as a speck on the far edge of the high drone's frame. It isn't close enough to identify cleanly, but it's close enough to prove the Russians are tracking the convoy's new route in near real time. The commander realizes what this actually is. Not a single attack, but a chase. A pressure campaign meant to force the transporter into a stop, a stall, a moment of immobility where the next move becomes predictable. So they changed the story again. A decoy vehicle breaks away, accelerating back toward the open road, kicking dust into the air on purpose. It's a crude trick, but crude tricks work when sensors are stressed and operators are hungry for a clean target. The decoy moves fast and loud, and the real convoy stays quiet and slow in the cut, letting the trees and terrain do the work. 6:34 a.m. The high feed catches movement near the decoy, shapes converging, low and quick. The Russians bite. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough that the pressure on the transporter eases for a few precious minutes. Those minutes are spent on pure survival logistics. The transporter clears the worst of the mud, reaches firmer ground, and angles back toward a narrower tree line where the canopy closes overhead. The driver keeps the speed just high enough to stay moving, just low enough to keep the fuselage stable. Then a new problem hits, one that feels almost insulting after everything else. A civilian car. Wrong place, wrong time, drifting toward the road ahead like it has no idea it is about to collide with a military operation. The escort vehicle surges forward, not to threaten, but to block, to wave the driver off, to push the car into a shoulder without escalation. Because a panic crash here would be as fatal as any drone. 6:38 a.m. The convoy slips into denser cover, and for the first time in nearly 20 minutes, the transporter is not fully visible from above. The high drone's view becomes a patchwork of branches and shadows, and the fuselage disappears into the tree line like a secret being swallowed. But the relief is thin. Everyone knows the same thing. The Russians have now confirmed two facts. Ukraine has the aircraft, and Ukraine has a route, which means the next phase won't be a single inbound at the edge of the sky. It will be a coordinated net designed to close every exit at once. And as the jamming fades for a split second, the high drone catches a final detail that freezes the convoy commander's voice mid-sentence. Multiple new movers shifting on parallel roads, spreading out like they're not chasing anymore. They're setting up the Intercept. January 3rd, 6:47 a.m. By the time the convoy finally reaches hardened cover, nobody celebrates. Engines idle, doors stay shut. The silence feels heavier than the chase itself. The transporter is intact. The fuselage is still there, scratched, splashed with mud, tilted just enough to remind everyone how close this came to ending differently. No explosion. No wreck on the roadside. Just proof that the mission did not collapse under pressure. But the real outcome is not measured in distance traveled. It is measured in what both sides learned. Ukraine proved it could move something this valuable through contested space, under active jamming, with hostile drones hunting in real time, and still keep the operation alive. That matters because it changes how every future recovery, relocation, and deception mission will be planned. Russia learned something too. Not just that the aircraft was taken, but that the response window is smaller than it used to be. That hunting with single strikes is no longer enough. That next time, hesitation will cost more than aggression. This is how the war evolves. Not in dramatic headlines, but in quiet recalibration. Routes are redrawn, signals are hardened, traps are widened. The next convoy will face tighter nets, faster intercepts, and fewer mistakes forgiven. And somewhere, planners on both sides are already rewriting playbooks based on what happened in these minutes on January 3rd. The road goes quiet again. Civilian traffic returns. The trees stop shaking. To anyone passing later, it looks like nothing happened here at all. But under that calm surface, the map has shifted. Because once a mission like this succeeds, it doesn't close a chapter. It opens a race between adaptation and exposure, between speed and certainty, between who learns faster next time. If you want to stay locked on to how these operations really unfold, how decisions under pressure reshape the battlefield long after the dust settles, keep your radar tuned right here. This story isn't over.